Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show. It's great to be back with you again. And we were 14 years old last week, so we're now on episode 613. Another fantastic guest today, Lisa Bing. Before we start, I'd just like to tell you just briefly about the show. If you're listening to the first time, what we're really about here is we care about introducing you to amazing guests who are doing fabulous work in the world of business or in maybe not-for-profit, but are also contributing through their work to a better world, trying to improve things in this very challenging time of metamorphosis and chaos that we seem to have around us. So that's what we want to do. We want to inspire you and also help you to step up and do your work in a good way, that really contributes to humanity and makes the place a better world. So in terms of my show last week, I'd like to say a big thank you to Anthony Willoughby. Anthony is an explorer, an adventurer, but he's also doing amazing work with Indigenous people around the world. He's literally his company's called Nomadic Leadership, I think it was. But he's lived his life very, very nomadically through living in Africa and Japan and various places. And he shared his thoughts about why we should all draw a territory map, which was interesting last week, and his frustration about the way the world's gone, how people seem to put more focus on trinkets and generating wealth for themselves than actually thinking about the bigger picture and what's important for humanity. So if you're interested in hearing from Anthony, do go and check out that in the archive. So today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about fixing the process and freeing the people. Often on this show, we've talked about the importance of how to manage and lead and engage and motivate people and how to go through the adventure of working in a corporate world or a not-for-profit world. But one of the subjects, and probably because it's a little in my blind spot, is process, and that we don't talk about too often. But I do recognize that it's very important to get the process right. And people often live in working worlds where the process is not right, and then you don't get the performance from people, you don't get the results that you want in your business. So I think it's a really important topic we're going to talk about today. Before I introduce you to Lisa, I would like to say a big thank you to the wonderful Libby Wagner. Libby is a great friend. She's part of my Elevation Collective community. She's a poet. She's written about 7 books. She's just completely inspiring. And she recommended that Lisa and I met, and really recommended Lisa as a great guest for the show. And my conversations with her so far have been fabulous. So I think you're going to enjoy today. So what are the toughest problems in your business aren't actually the people? Perhaps they're actually the process. And what if the missing ingredient in leadership today is learning how to hold people accountable with both clarity and compassion? So Lisa Bing is a sought-after leadership strategist. She's an educator. She's a board leader. That's board as in on company boards, not bored as in sleepy and fed up, because it's definitely not her. Her career spans corporate boardrooms, New York, NYU classrooms, faith communities, and the arts. And she's worked with executives across lots of industries for over 20 years. She's drawing on unique methods that weave in movement and dance and performing arts. So we're going to hear a little bit about that today, which is quite unique and fascinating. And I think it's just important to explore and distinguish between process problems, people problems, and really how to get all of this right so that relationships thrive rather than are broken down. Her journey from Prudential to Move to mentoring senior executives has revealed lots of ways to lead with humanity and impact. Now you realize why I wanted Lisa on the show, because that's what I care about too. So a big, big welcome today to my guest, to Lisa Bing.
Chris, thank you so much. That is for that really, really wonderful and warm introduction. I'm very excited, as I mentioned to you earlier, to talk with you and your audience today.
You're very welcome. And to maybe tell us, Lisa, where's home for you?
So home for me is Brooklyn, New York. I am an OG Brooklynite. I actually live in the house that I grew up in, which is unusual for a lot of folks. And Brooklyn is in my heart as well as in I'm in their space.
So just tell you better just explain because we have a lot of people from all sorts of countries. OG, is that own grown or what do you mean, or what's OG?
Well, old guard.
Original.
Oh, well, there are there are different definitions, but I'll go with old guard.
Old guard. Okay, so that means yeah. So, so I've not heard that statement before, so I thought we'd clarify that one.
So, fun fact,
Yep.
Christopher Wallace, aka Biggie Smalls, grew up down four doors down from me. So I'm on Biggie's block.
I'm biggest, but okay.
So for better or for worse.
Well, the last time I came to New York, I came to do the New York Marathon.
Yeah, well,
It's a
actually,
great
you
way
ran
to,
right past me
yeah,
because the marathon run, you ran down Lafayette Avenue, I believe.
I
And
think
if
so.
you remember, you
Yeah,
may not have paid attention to the streets, but
but
that's 2 blocks over.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we went over. Did we go over the? Did we go over the Brooklyn Bridge? It was a very
I,
Sarno bridge
I,
we started
I
on.
think you did. I
Yeah.
think you did. I'm probably a 10, 12 minute walk from the Brooklyn Bridge.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So,
I'm in an area called Clinton Hill, which is more South Brooklyn, I suppose, and near Fort Greene. Spike Lee grew up in this neighborhood, did a lot of movies, has done a lot of movies in the area and so forth. So Steiner Studios is a few blocks away now, so there's a lot of filming that goes on around here,
so
much to our chagrin.
so you where it all happens.
Where,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, yeah, yeah. Again, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an exciting, vibrant city, isn't it?
It is. It is. I mean, look, in all seriousness, 30 years ago, I would talk to friends who didn't live in New York, and I would say Brooklyn is one of the best kept secrets
Yeah.
going. There's a texture here with, the neighborhoods, there's an energy, there's a verve. And now the secret is out and, you know,
Ah.
not so much.
Probably helpful for property prices, though.
Well, that's a whole other podcast.
Uh, so tell me about that. You were brought up in
I'm Brooklyn, yeah.
in Brooklyn, yeah. So, what were your early influences living in New York, in Brooklyn, that have maybe
Well,
impacted, how you came to do what you do today?
yeah. Well, education was very important to my parents. My mother was born and raised in Durham, North Carolina during the Jim Crow era, and she moved to New York when she was 20 with a degree in chemistry and biology. And that was a long time ago. And my dad actually grew up just blocks away from here. So he, was always in this neighborhood. And they met here in Brooklyn, and education was always important. Exposing me to a lots of things was very important to my mother. She was very interested in the arts. She had a subscription to the Metropolitan Opera for 50 years. And she took every advantage of New York. So education was very important. I went to actually a Black-owned private school here in Brooklyn in Bed-Stuy. It's no longer around, from nursery to eighth grade. And from there, I went to Stuyvesant High School, which is one of the best high schools in the country. Um, and from there, Boston University. So education has always been important. And I always thought I would be an educator. As a kid, I had lots of dolls and I would teach my dolls. I'd line them up on my extra bed and teach them with a very stern, a stern approach. But once I got into education at Boston University, I realized that wasn't something I wanted to do professionally. Long story short, I got into a management intern program at Prudential because my summer jobs were always in business, from IBM to attorneys and so forth. And so I always enjoyed business and was fortunate enough to be hired into a management intern program, which was a 3-year rotational program. Every 6 to 9 months, I'd move through or auditing, accounting, actuarial, underwriting, and so forth. So that was really my grounding, and we had very targeted management training. So I always had some leadership capacity. I came across some notes. Apparently, I was the class president in second grade. And I've had leadership experiences along the way, even in high school. I wanted to be a cheerleader, and the city was going through a fiscal crisis, and it was eliminated, but I got it back. I got folks involved and teachers, I coerced teachers to support us and so forth. So I've always had some leadership capabilities naturally, and then I've had a lot of training around it.
Mm.
So that's a bit about how I got started.
Yeah, and so you experienced accountancy and some of the more detailed elements, the process elements of a business.
Yeah, yeah.
As an internship.
Without really knowing what I was doing, and so you have these experiences, which, as I counsel young people today, even, to follow your curiosity, and try new things, because you're always learning something along the way. I mean, even if you don't like it, you know, and sometimes you don't realize what you're learning until something comes up and, something comes out of you that you didn't know where it came from.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
But one thing you just triggered for me in my thinking, you took me back to a time when I was in my first internship, well, post degree, and I was in my first week, and the sales director of the company came along to my desk and said, "Could I share something with you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm retiring this week, and you're just starting your career, so I'd like to share at this point with you." And he said, "People are everything." And then he walked off and left me with it. I thought about that for a lot of years, and there's definitely a lot of wisdom in that short statement. Um,
that's right.
but you've learned that maybe process is important too.
Yeah. Yeah, I have. And, the, um, the clarity around that distinction between people problems versus process problems has come to me in recent years. So it wasn't something I was always conscious about. But one of the things that I think that I do, and I think is critical for leaders, is reflection. Right? If we just go through, people say, well, with age comes wisdom, and I said, well, not necessarily. Sometimes people just get old. You
Yep.
know? Wisdom requires some intentionality about reflecting on your experience and what are you taking from it. Whether it's something to do more of, less of, or to stop doing. And so what I've come to recognize is that in many organizations, people are blamed for process problems. Um, and the distinction between the two is not made often enough. Now, sometimes it's a people problem and sometimes it's a process problem. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. So, what do I mean by that? Well, if I'm having trouble, if I have a staff person who's not meeting deadlines, for example, the go-to often is, well, Lisa's not organized. She's not meeting deadlines. She's not doing her job. So, Lisa, why aren't you doing your job? As opposed to first ferreting out, well, what's the cause of you missing the deadlines? Um, is it that you are disorganized and have trouble prioritizing? Well, then why do you have trouble prioritizing? Well, it might be because my manager is giving me, project after project after project, and we don't have a process of communicating around what's urgent, what's not, what's really needed now, and so forth. And as the staff person, given the power differential, I may not feel confident enough to say, well, hey, Chris, I'm not sure what you really want me to do. Right. So it's a combination of people and process. The process is, how do we communicate with each other? Am I, as the manager, am I creating an environment where my people are empowered to ask questions and, not only empowered, but expected, right? To ask me questions, to push back and so forth. Um, as far as a process problem, are we not setting priorities as a manager? Some managers say, well, everything is a priority. Well, that's ridiculous because then nothing is. So that's a very clear management process problem. So process has multiple layers also, and I think it's important to distinguish. Now, what's a people problem? A people problem is, do they not have the skills to be able to do the job? In today's world, excuse me. Well, listen, even when I was coming along, computers were advancing. I had to learn new systems and so forth. So did I have the skills, right, to do that? Or is it an attitude problem? Now, I may have the skills. I can do it, but for whatever reason, I don't want to do it. Well, that's a different issue, right? And so, as managers, and today more than ever, we have to be able to do more assessment around what's the real issue here. Also, understanding more about people and having a more strategic thinking process to the work in general. We're not just churning stuff out. And that's a lot of managers are just churning stuff out. They're very transactional. We met the deadlines, we get it done, repeat, rinse and repeat next week. And that's not serving them as well as they as much as well as possible. And also, actually, it's not serving them as well as it could be today. But even beyond that, especially with the advent of AI and other technological advances, they're falling behind if they're not looking ahead.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
For people.
And so the process, having some sensibilities around and attention to process is really critical for innovation, for moving forward, for preparing for the future as well.
How would you define process?
Process is a series of steps. I mean, just to be very simple about it, right? It's a series of steps. We all have a morning process, right? You get up, our processes may be different. I make the coffee, I brush my teeth, I meditate, I do whatever, right? I have a journal. So you have a process. Other people have different processes. But it's a series of steps that will get you from point A to point B.
Yeah, yeah. So going back, maybe now the 1970s, possibly 1980s, there was a time where, maybe 90s actually, you can probably be maybe pretty aware of this, but the people used to go into time and motion studies, didn't they?
Yes,
They got into kind of looking precisely what people were trying to do to try and improve productivity.
that's right.
But then that was being too process driven at that time because
Well,
there's
you know,
this tension, isn't there, at
that's
times?
right. That's right. Well, and I always say too much of a good thing goes bad, right?
Yeah.
Even, too much chocolate cake after a while creates a problem. So there's a balance. And the challenge with, managing and leading always, but even more today is this is not a bits and bytes kind of endeavor. It's not an if then situation. We need to have some tools in a toolkit. We're like carpenters,
Mm.
right? You show up to the job, you have a hammer, saw, a screwdriver, and some nails, and you say, what does the job require? And you pull out the tools that the job requires. If it's a repair, if you're building something, if it's a different process. Do we need to excavate? Do we need to remove stuff before we can build stuff, or are we making a patch, right? It's the same thing with leadership, and which is what makes it tricky, because there's a lot of judgment involved. What are the tools? The tools are the ability to reflect, the ability to assess effectively, the ability to communicate, to extract information from others, as well as to impart information from others in a way that connects. Um, it's making decisions, big and small, fast and slow. Um, it's problem solving. And problem solving is a hugely misunderstood process because, I'm presented with a problem often. The the shipment is not arriving on time. And immediately I go to solutions. Well, should we start earlier? Should we do it later? Should we shift vendors? As opposed to the first question needs to be, why is there a delay? What is the cause of the delay? And then you can start to get to the solutions. The very recent example, I was with a group this week, and we were talking about performance management, and we had some role plays, a case study around. Then the case was that the employee was inconsistent in their work, and so there was some discussion around, well, what's the expectation, right? And after a few minutes, it was like simply, we need them to be consistent. It's not. It's not always that complicated. It's simple, not always easy, but it's not as complicated or as hard as people often think about. They just need new ways of thinking and some different tools.
Mm. You discovered early on that many so-called diversity problems
Yeah,
were actually process issues
yeah.
as well as people issues. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I was at Prudential at the time in the early 90s when the whole diversity movement, if you will, started to emerge. And after training the entire enterprise, each department was asked to identify its issues and come up with an action plan. And I was put in charge of it in the international department in the reinsurance company at the time. And I was put in charge of this. And my approach was to set up focus groups that were homogeneous by race and gender with a peer-led facilitator. Basically, I did a study. And what I discovered was all the different groups, white women, black women, the black men, the men of color, the symptoms were different, but underneath the cause was consistent across all five groups, that there was a lack of coaching and feedback. And I brought this to my senior leadership team and said, this is not a diversity issue because we're the international department and I understood diversity. I understood that if you're going to Japan, you don't wrap the gift in white because that's a sign of death, right? So, um, and not to say that there weren't issues around diversity, but the core of what we're dealing with here is a management problem. And and that led actually to the work that I'm doing today, because my boss in his infinite wisdom said, well, why don't we coach groups of people? And I ended up creating a 6-part workshop series called the Business of Personal Development, the coaching series for my international department, and then the comptroller's department came on board. And it was a 4-month process, program, and so forth to empower the staff and also equip the managers to keep it going from a coaching standpoint. So the idea was to jumpstart the coaching for the managers to keep it going.
Mm.
And that led me into this whole world of consulting that I did not know existed before then.
So, so I want to know, I'm just sort of wondering too, is I'm thinking now, my mind's thinking about, cases and examples I'm thinking about an example in a hospital at the moment. Somebody administers, a young doctor administers a drug to a patient and they die. The family, obviously we're all complaining, all the heat's on that person. But actually, when you look at the situation and you realize that perhaps there was no nurses to support because they were
Yeah,
short-staffed. There was no consultant on at the time. This person was still technically in training. You look at that. Actually, it's a horrendous thing that happened, but the system has failed.
that's right.
But often the person's the one that gets the blame and gets hauled over the
That's exactly
coals.
right. That's exactly right. And that's a great context because the whole checklist, the process of a checklist in medicine as well as for pilots emerged from the medical community, right?
Yeah.
Why do we have such an incidence of sepsis and so forth? And they uncovered the well, the washing of the hands was a big issue, but also in the emergency, whenever you go in for surgery, they ask you multiple times from multiple people, why are you here? Is it what leg are you focused on? Or is the procedure being done on and so forth. So there's a checklist that emerged from that. At the same time, there's also the people process in this case, because number one, are the doctors or the nurses trained to ask the right questions? What is the bedside manner? Are you listening to, and this is a big issue in maternal health today, particularly around Black women and pregnancy. Are you listening to your patients in the same way? And assessing. So that's a great example of where it's both process and people need
Mm,
to come together. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You've got to look at both of them together. My wife is a GP, a medic, and she sometimes tell a story when she was a young doctor in a hospital where two nurses got very, very concerned, and because someone had lost an enormous amount of weight. So they came to her really concerned and said, "Look, yesterday this person weighed this, today they weighed this," and my wife pointed out to them that perhaps they needed to look at the patient because yesterday afternoon they'd had their leg removed.
Wow. Is that a true story?
Yeah, yeah. So they're so focused on the process and focused on the.
Right. That's right. Well, especially, I didn't obviously know where that story was going, but I didn't think from day one to day two that the weight loss would be so dramatic, but over time. But I guess, yeah, if you're losing 20 pounds overnight.
And the rest. Well, on that note, we're going to go to commercial break, and we'll find out a little bit more about some of the things that we need to consider when it comes to process on people. And we'll also have a little talk about dance and the arts and how this links in and what you've learned from your dancing experiences. So we'll be back again in just a couple of minutes. Do join us after the break. Hi, this is Chris Cooper. You listen to the Business Elevation Show. I'm with Lisa Bing, and we're talking about fixing the process to free the people. Lisa, can you maybe give me some examples of how you go about fixing a process, actually? That would be helpful.
Well, I think the first thing is to be aware, right? So I think about, why is there this breakdown between people and process, and why are managers and leaders not thinking about that? Well, largely because they haven't been necessarily been exposed to the idea,
Mm.
in fair, because they're smart, capable, accomplished people. And this just hasn't been something that they've been thinking about or exposed to. So that's number one. Number two, people are easy, right? It's an easy target.
Yeah.
Lisa's not meeting the deadlines. Well, Lisa's the problem, right? If we're not, again, if we're not thoughtful, if we're not reflective. And also, I think, as managers and leaders, we have to be very clear about what our role is. What is the job of managing and leading? And the job of managing and leading is not doing the work, it's getting the work done through others. It's developing others so that they can perform and produce at their best. It's creating an environment where people can bring their best. These are all process issues, but it's not framed that way, right? And so, and I think about some clients that I've worked with who have been leading transactional areas. So if you think about an accounting department, or if you think about even a sales department is transactional to a certain point. If you're processing claims, very transactional, but also there's a people. So if I'm again churning it out, I'm not necessarily thinking, and I have not been exposed to thinking about my work leading differently, then I'm just going to do more of what I've done, right? Because how do I know what I don't know?
Yes.
Right? And I can't know what I don't know if I'm not exposed beyond my current experience.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a big issue. And, I think for organizations, corporate and nonprofit, at the senior most levels, it's important to think about how am I exposing my people beyond their current experience. So that's number one. And so how do you fix a process? You can't fix anything if you don't know, number one, that it needs attention. And number two, if you haven't identified or diagnosed the problem effectively, right? So I think, it's really very simple just to start there, to recognize and to discern, is this people or is this the or process or some combination? And then what's the cause? Because then it's easy to know what to do.
Yeah. That's really, really helpful is to think. So often, I'm sure you are in your work, you probably sit in meetings and people at a board level are saying it's the sales department's problem. They're not doing this. In finance, they're not doing that. So and so's yeah, not doing this well, and they're upsetting customers. And often you hear this sort of language, and you think, actually, have you sought first to understand before
That's right.
going to be
That's
understood?
exactly right.
Because
That's exactly. I had that conversation yesterday
I have it regularly too with my clients.
with a senior finance guy, and he's saying, "Well, so and so's not doing this," and but what is your part in this,
Mm.
right? And particularly at the senior level, I think it's there. They you need to be held to account. I mean, your job is to look at your job is to be strategic. Your job is to create spaces for people to thrive. That is fundamentally your job at the senior most levels. But I don't think that if you ask many senior executives, they would describe it in that way.
No.
They would be very functionally focused. Um, and and I think and actually what I'm starting to realize more and more is in today's world, there needs to be a role redefinition. for many senior leaders. Because in fairness, too, especially if they've been in their jobs or in their roles for a number of years, you're sitting still and the world around us is changing. And if we're not tuned into that, it's easy it's like, have you ever been in a restaurant, one of those rotating restaurants,
Yes, I have. Yes.
right? So you're sitting still,
Yes.
but everything, and all of a sudden you look up after 30 minutes and you realize, oh, we're not in the same place
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
But if you go through the entire dinner and you never look up, you may not realize that you've moved through different spaces. And I
Mm.
think that's what's happening, in a lot of organizations with a lot of senior leaders, because, and in fairness, and it's not a criticism, I think it's a matter of, raising awareness. They've got busy plates, they've got full plates, and they're just trying to keep up. And so, there has to be some space made. Sometimes you have to step back to step forward. And that feels counterintuitive. The analogy I often go to is, as a downhill skier, when you're learning to ski and your skis pick up speed, the inclination is to lean forward, is to sit back and hold on, right? But you do that and your skis fly out from under you and you lose control and you go faster. The counterintuitive move is to lean into the mountain,
Mm.
lean into the skis, and that allows you to slow down and regain control. And in leadership, it's the same kind of thing. The idea of stepping back, of doing less, feels very scary and counterintuitive. But the only way that you're going to move forward is by doing that so that you can take a different view.
Mm.
Who are you talking to? Are you talking to people just like you? What are you reading? Are you reading just the accounting stuff or the tech stuff, as opposed, and there have been studies that show that senior executives, CEOs, frankly, that read more fiction are more effective.
Oh, really? That's
Yes,
interesting.
yes, yes. It broadens your perspective. It
Yes.
opens your world.
Yes.
Um, it improves your language, and so
Mm.
that's another big issue for managers today to be able to they may have the idea, I need to help Lisa, improve in her work, but what is the language I use that creates the accountability and the compassion, right? I'm not beating the hell out of you. Well, you're missing deadlines. The compassion is help me understand what's going on in your world, right? And then the accountability is, well, here's the job. Here's what's expected. Now let's figure out, what you need to learn, what new tools, what adjustments you need to make in order to meet those expectations.
Mm.
So it's not one or the other. Yeah.
And when do companies typically bring you in when there's a process problem? How do people engage with you?
Well, lately it's been a leader is frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody is frustrated.
Often with their people. I guess they're
Yeah.
not getting the
Well, that's
numbers.
right. That's right. That's right. And it's something along the lines of, and sometimes in being fair, I'm being a bit playful about it. But oftentimes it's a recognition, you know, we've moved as an organization, and now our leadership needs to expand, needs to grow. We need to rethink where we are. Um, Sometimes it's a matter of I need my senior team to be more strategic because they are very transactional,
Yeah.
and that's a big issue, right? That's a big one. Um, and oftentimes, it is more about how do I address a concern or a problem. And what I really hope leaders will do more of is we're doing well. Now, okay, what do we need to do to keep this going? Right? How do we prepare for the future? How do we build on our success? Because getting help from me or somebody like me, other consultants, is not always about solving a problem. you know Growth is a huge issue these days. People think of that as the strategy, which it really isn't. That's a whole other conversation. But we want to grow, right? And so um, um, how do we do that in a way that doesn't, set people's hair on fire, consistently for the next 2 years.
So you mentioned there about leaders who read fiction,
Yeah.
often better equipped in the workplace. They're more maybe more creative and talented. Now, one of your interests is dance. So
Yeah.
how has that helped you in your work and help
Yes.
customers? Tell us
Yes.
about
What a great surprise and what a great gift. So some years ago, coming as 10 years ago now, I was asked to participate in a Dancing with the Stars type competition. So I was paired as a business leader with a professional dancer, Nigel Campbell, who was dancing at the time, and Chanel De Silva was his business partner. They had just formed Move NYC, literally a year before, and to provide tuition-free uh, collegiate and career um, uh, training for polishing, in my view, for New York City high school teenagers who are aspiring professional dancers. So, 4 months of training. Um, you know, you put a blue light in the basement. I can hold my own.
that.
I did tell you I'm OG Brooklyn, right? But this was a whole different world for me. The expectations, the standard. These were two Juilliard grads. They were Princess Grace Award winners. They danced professionally around the world. So they were serious.
Mm.
I had homework. I had all these things. So I'm doing this. We get to a point, it's about a month or so in, and Nigel says, and Nigel's probably about 5'8", and I'm 5'9", and um, healthy. Let's put it that way. He said, I think we need a lift here. And my heart went into spasm. And I said, Wait, what? Have you seen me? He said, Oh, Lisa, I lift women for a living. Like, please don't insult me. And so I was really nervous about this.
Hmm.
Here's this guy who's 2 inches smaller than me, and he's talking about lifting me and spinning me around and all these sort of things. But I gave in. I had to trust him. I mean, they didn't offer this on day one. This was, some rapport had been built. We had a trusting relationship. And they introduced this idea. I said, okay, I'll try it. It went really well. It ended up being one of my favorite parts of the dance. And, and it really, the whole experience highlighted a few things for me in terms of building trust, creating partnership, and what that means. What does it mean to be supportive? Chanel said to me earlier on in the process, maybe you should take some some Zumba classes because I needed to, and it was a very loving way of saying, okay, you need to get more in your body. You need to get more grounded. So she was coaching me in a way that didn't make me feel bad. It didn't shut me down, but it let me know that I needed to do some more improvements. Right. So the supportive behavior, particularly the whole process of the lift. If Nigel particularly, who had to carry me literally, wasn't supportive and encouraging, I would never have done it. The communication, how we choreographed it. I mean, they did the choreographing. I had a few little pieces in there. Um, and there was a moment where we had a disagreement around the way it should go. They were right. But they listened to me, right? And how do you work those things out? So what I started, and I was teaching at NYU at the time, the leadership and management course for working managers. And I thought, well, this is really interesting to help managers have a visceral experience of what it feels like to be supportive, to be supported, and then what it feels like to give support, right? To build trust. Trust is not an all or nothing proposition. Baby steps.
Mm.
Okay, you're not ready to do, the full fall. Well, let's just take one step at a time. You're not ready to do the full campaign, but just make a list of possible donors, right? That kind of thing. So again, it's process. Building trust is a process.
Mm.
Building rapport is a process. And so having that mental framework that, okay, they're not ready for this yet, but let's do a little bit, and I'm here for you. I'm supporting you. Um, is really critical. And then, fast forward 10 years, when I discovered what they were trying to do to build this organization, I started to coach and mentor them around what that meant to be leaders, and they to this day talk about how traumatized they were when I told them. They said, well, we're just dancers. And I said, no, 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 you're entrepreneurs. You're not them. And that shift in identity was really critical for them to create the organization, the $150 million organization, excuse me, that they have now 10 years later, hundreds of kids in top conservatories, 100% matriculation rate, dancing in the field, that kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Uh, we mentioned Libby Wagner earlier. Libby works with poetry often with her clients, and I occasionally build music into working with some of my clients. Do you build dance into? Have you ever
Well,
any
we don't
studio
call it
executive
dance.
dancing
We don't call it dance.
movement or whatever? What do you call it?
Movement.
Movement. Okay.
Movement. Um, I did it a lot with my NYU students because I always considered that classroom as my laboratory,
Yeah.
which I found, was very helpful. Students found their own how their own discomfort impacts the relationship,
Mm.
right? So if I'm feeling a discomfort for whatever reason. I'm uncomfortable, having this conversation. I'm uncomfortable that you might have skills that I don't have. You might be better than me.
Yeah.
That affects the relationship. And so those kinds of feelings came up so that they could look at them and start to process them. Um, they started to recognize that there are steps involved in trust. Trust is not this
Mm.
conceptual notion, but it's very concrete, and there are ways of building trust. Um, and it helped them to really get to reflect on where they are, where they might be with their own staffs and people that they interact with, and what they may need to adjust. Now, in fairness, I have done this with some paying clients. And I'm a bit judicious. I have I have a group that I'm thinking about because it is so different from what uh, most people's experience around development and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd like to do it more. I probably have been a little hesitant.
I was just telling someone today, actually, probably 10 years ago now, maybe even a little longer. I was working with a board of a company that I know quite well. They've done quite a bit of work with them, and I wanted them to experience being out of flow because we were doing some work about where you're naturally in your flow in your work and each member of the team, etc. But I wanted them to experience being out of flow. So what I did was I'd hidden a guitar in a cupboard before it started, and I got them all to sing "Wish You Were Here" by Pink Floyd while I played the guitar.
Right.
And it was hilarious. I mean, even now, the managing director talks about how I managed to get the funniest thing he's ever seen was at the time one of the more detailed directors being made to sing Pink "Wish You
Yeah,
Were Here" by Pink Floyd, and his discomfort. It was so funny. It certainly demonstrated the point, and it's been remembered.
that's right. That's right. That's right. Well, I have people who are varying degrees of of comfort. And, and part of the lesson is as leaders, we are being called to do uncomfortable things.
Yes.
It's part of the job. And so anyway, yeah.
I look forward to when you do it. Let me know because I look forward to
I,
hearing how you get on and and how it
well,
goes.
I'll come over and we bring the music and the movement together. We could come up with, I'm sure we could cook up something really fun and interesting.
Probably yes. It
You
sounds
know,
sounds it sounds good. It
when you
sounds.
can't stay on the beat, what do you do?
So from all of your experience with process and people and dance and like quite a few years I think since you started your career in the Prudential, what would you recommend? Is a single piece of advice you'd give to a young leader when it comes to getting themselves prepared around this area of process and people?
Yeah, I think two basic things. One is, and it's in line with your work around, how are you improving the world? And or how do you hope to improve the world? What is unique about what is unique about you that you're bringing to the table that will help others improve their conditions in their lives? And to think about and also to develop the muscle of reflection. So I think maybe it's three things. What is my unique contribution? Or what is my contribution? It may not be unique. um, you know, we have, people in California grow vegetables, people in other places grow vegetables. So it doesn't have to be unique, but it has to be something that you bring. And how is it improving the lives and conditions of others? And how are you developing the practice of reflection? It's important to consider what's happened here. What's my part?
Yes.
Because you can't help improve the conditions of others, without being condescending and superior, because that's not the point. Um, but to say, well, what's my part in this project, in this process? If it's one person, a few people, many, it doesn't matter. But what's my part? And how are others, how is this benefiting the other?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when if something goes wrong, holding a mirror up to yourself first before you then, try and
Yeah.
point at someone else or
So
something.
that's true. And also when something goes right, I think we focus too much on what goes wrong.
Yep.
Um, because we want to also look at what went right that
Yeah.
I can keep doing, what went right that I can share with others. And I think if I were to boil it all down, fundamentally, leadership is not about you. It is not about you. And when I've had people say to me, well, Lisa, how do I become a great leader? I know we're in trouble because the focus is on how do I help improve the conditions of others?
Mm.
How do I create change that matters? How do I help others see their value in the world? Because the more you do that, the more your stock goes up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because people measure you on value, don't they?
that's right. That's right. And that's what draws people in.
Mm.
People, you ask about my NYU experience, big takeaway from my informal scientist, my informal study is the reasons why people choose to follow. Top three reasons. One, you build my confidence. Two, I'm learning from you. Three, our values are aligned, right? It's all about I follow you because of your impact on me.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, we've got to end there. It's been fantastic. I've loved talking to you today and hearing your wisdom and get people thinking about things like accountability and process as well as people and also to think about the part that you're playing in this and
Yeah,
create the sort of environment that other people can thrive and flourish. And
yeah,
it's not about you, although often some of the change might start with you.
That's right. That's right. Well, this has been great fun for me. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you. I could talk for you another hour.
Absolutely. Well, if you want to find out more about the work that Lisa's doing, you want to connect with Lisa, bingconsulting.biz. That's
That's
right.
right.
You can check all of that out. And I'm sure that Lisa's also on social media and LinkedIn and
Yep.
places like that, so you can check her out there. On next week's show, we have Tessa White. Tessa is a fabulous woman. She's part of Expert. She's a job doctor. She has over 1 million followers on social media. She's a member of the Elevation Collective community, and we're going to talk about her latest book, which is about the 5 stages of career growth. So we're going to learn about that next week, which is really helpful. She's got some fascinating insights when we've spoken before about the unspoken rules behind being successful in career. She really does understand it, and she is the chair of one of the biggest universities in Utah at the moment as well. So with 30,000 students, she's great. So do come and join us next week. Any questions or comments? I'd love to hear from you, Chris at chriscooper.co.uk. And once again, a huge thank you to Lisa. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun. It's been educational and entertaining.
It's been my great pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Welcome. Take care.
Bye bye now.